Hi there, this is Josh McKinnon with McKinnonHomes.ca, brokered by eXp Realty. And today we're talking about forms, specifically a residential purchase contract. Let's get into it. All right, today we're talking residential purchase contracts. So this is just a contract that we would use when we're purchasing a house, not a condominium, and not a property that's rural. This is only used to purchase straight out homes and duplexes. So let's get into it. It's the best way for me to explain it. All right. So purchase contracts vary, but because we are legislated and governed in Alberta, we use this contract as real estate agents. So as you can see, buyer and seller, pretty simple. The municipal address goes in here, so that's one part. This here part here, the legal description. So this is super important because sometimes the legal description it looks very different. It comes with a lot block plan. So that is when it was first subdivided, this is how it was going to look. And these unattached goods. All right. So whether you're selling or buying, you're going to be looking at all these things all at the same time. So unattached goods are those chattels, the things that the seller is willing to let go. They're okay letting go of the fridge, stove, washer, dryer lots of times. And it could be a list of many different things in here. This contract, though, is not between a real estate agent or their brokerage and a buyer or seller. As you can see up top here, it's between the buyer and seller and us real estate agents. We negotiate this stuff for our clients. We've already signed representation agreements, whether we're the seller or the buyer, and that way we know how we're going to be protected and what's expected from our agent. All right, in here you can see the purchase price. So this is where we do the negotiation of price. And here it says here in 2.3, this is actually when we're going to do the negotiation on when possession will happen. That's closing day. It's the day in which the buyer will take possession. As you can see here, we call it the completion day, and you can see it's at noon on this date. You'll also notice here too, if this is a property and let's say there's a tenant involved, it may say here that we may cross out vacant possession, right? Because a tenant's involved. So a landlord's going to purchase it. That's a different thing, but that's where you might see a bit of a change. All right, general terms. Wow, there's a lot here. So in here, the buyer feels that the seller needs to make sure that they've disclosed things, if there is anything to be disclosed. That at the time that there'll be an RPR, you can see down here under I, so a real property report, or there'll be title insurance if that's not the case. This stuff here is all up to us to negotiate. Maybe sometimes things are going to be here, maybe there won't be, but these are the general terms, and then we're going to get into how that stuff actually works out. You can see here that we've already decided what kind of brokerage. So it could be the selling brokerage in 99% of the cases where there's two realtors involved, the selling brokerage will take care of the documentation. Some brokerages do not do that. That's not part of what they're willing to do. So as the buyer in that case, you would have your buying agent, they would have to then agree to look after the documentation. So that includes any relevant details about the property, including contracts, amendments, addendums to those contracts, and of course waivers or non-waivers. In the case of a non-waiver, we wouldn't be going much further than just between the brokerages. And 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 as real estate agents, you're going to find that we will not do a deal unless two lawyers are involved. We want to make sure that everything happens legally, and I'm not a lawyer, and neither is the other agent. So, and most buyers, most buyers or sellers are not lawyers either. And even if they are, this is not one time they want to stand out and put their law license up for sale. So the seller and buyer agree in 4.2. Wow, this one here is about deposits, as you can see. So, who's going to hold on to the money? And again, if it's two realtors involved, 99% of the time, the selling brokerage will hold the deposit on behalf of the buyer and seller. It's held in trust, and that money is not theirs, and it doesn't belong to the buyer or the seller until possession day happens, and that money is either transferred or it's used to pay out any expenses. And you can see here that this is where we put in the deposit. So, and that could be anything. Lots of people get really, sometimes they don't have a lot of cash. They need to sell their home before they unlock the cash. So sometimes the deposit's low. Sometimes it's high. Sometimes they're a cash buyer, so they want to show just, like, I'm dead serious. I'm taking the home. And you can see here how it's going to be paid. So if it's a quick closing, or there's a short amount of time between the time the deposit has to be received and the time possession happens. So let's say, it says in the contract here that, 20 days before possession, I'll have the deposit. It could say anything, because this is a contract between buyers and sellers. And you'll hear that over and over again with me. Between buyers and sellers, not between real estate agents. A lot of things us real estate agents will advise our clients on to do, but it isn't a contract between us. So the method of payment, the one thing that I do know is that brokerages cannot close a deal if we don't have certified order drafts if there's less than 30 days. All brokerages have a waiting time on a regular check, just like anyone, to make sure it clears. So that's a hard thing that we hold pretty fast to, whether you're the selling brokerage or the buying brokerage. Sometimes an additional deposit is put down because maybe there's a long length of time. We want to make sure that the buyer is going to buy the home. So deposit is just one form of recourse if the buyer walks and they've waived all their conditions, and it's just one of the recourses. It doesn't mean that that's the end of it either. As you can see here, there's quite a few things here, and there's even rules. Like, here's an example, 4.6. The trustee, so the real estate company, will make sure that money is put into a trust account like within 3 business days or less of receipt. So as soon as they receive it, they pretty much got to put it in. If you're using EXP, it'll be in there almost automatically as soon as either I or Anita pick it up, or sometimes the other agent can deposit it directly right into our trust account. So it's one of those protections that we offer. All right, land title. So one of the things this contract does is it gives instruction also to lawyers. So the buyer and the seller are agreeing to stuff, but we also have to give instruction to the lawyer. So a lot of this stuff is pre-printed because we want to make sure that nothing's forgotten. We want to make sure the seller isn't on the hook for something. We also want to make sure the buyer isn't on the hook for something that they didn't know. So all these things here come into play. If you're signing this document via electronic, and we highly suggest that you have watched this video, and that you go over it reading line by line, because there may be things that you don't quite understand. That's okay. If you are receiving this contract and you're using our services as selling, we will go over this stuff to make sure. A lot of this would have been covered during the listing process because a lot of this just mimics what's in the listing contract. It's making sure that we know what we're selling. Buyers don't get upset till they realize, I didn't know I was buying that. I maybe would have walked away if I knew that was a problem, right? So we want to make sure that they know exactly what they're getting. On the other hand, if you're a buyer and you're using our services, we'll be going over all of this and making sure that you know exactly what's going on. Now, if you're a seller, you know we've talked about dower in the listing agreement, but if you're a buyer, you may not understand what this means right here. So dower is an interesting legal issue. It happens when the seller, only one of the sellers are on title and they're legally married. So not common law married, but that they are legally married. Now they could even be separated and still legally be married. And so dower can come into effect for either spouse. It may not matter. So we need to know that dower consent and acknowledgement form has been signed and at a certain date. And that also has to be signed with this contract. So it's not like a quick 2-minute, we can agree to everything and we send it back. If you're working with us as a buyer, we could send this back to the seller, but the seller can't just say yeah. They actually have to go and make sure this is signed appropriately, lots of times with their lawyer. All right, conditions. This could be anything in here, but most of the time, financing, if you're the buyer, you need to make sure that not only that you're qualified to pay that payment and make sure that's okay. That's a form of qualifying that gets you 50% of the way. But financing includes the other 50%, the 50% that most people don't think about, the house. So financing is one of those things where the bank has the right to say no to any house. No explanation required. No. I'm not qualified? I thought I was qualified. And this is where a lot of issues can arise in up and down markets, is where they think they're qualified for the house, but they're only qualified personally to make those payments, not because the bank says yes to the house. And there are reasons why that can be. Property inspection. Another place where in a hot market people are like, well, I'll let the property inspection go if you're the buyer, and sometimes the seller's like, well, I cross that out. I don't want them to do that, right? So we got to be very careful what kind of liabilities, and to make sure that the buyer and seller are happy with the outcome. A lot of times conditions are acceptable. Sometimes they're not. Sale of a buyer's property is another thing. So the buyer has to sell his home in order to buy your home. Is it better to know that up front? Yeah, it is. Because if they sign this, they also agree to some other things too. So it's good for us to know. It's good to be as upfront as possible about what you're going to need to make you feel good about purchasing the property. And maybe not just feel good, but to make sure you're qualified to buy the property, right? If you don't sell your home, you're not going to be able to buy it. Well, it's a good thing to tell people. And then there could be other conditions. Could be parents are putting up the deposit and they just want to make sure that mom and dad like the home too, right? So seller's conditions. Sometimes this happens. Sellers have conditions on the sale of their property. An example might be simply that they need 24 or 48 hours to find another property before they can say yes to selling this one. So what they'll normally do is wait till your conditions are waived, and they'll say we have 24, 48 hours after all of that. And even though you've kind of waived your conditions up here, they can do a mutual general release and say no, because not all conditions have been satisfied. So then the contract cannot go through. So they may have a condition like that in there. Condition and notices. Okay, so this is when we either waive a condition or we can't waive the condition. So it says here that we have to be able to unilaterally waive all conditions. So if there's a seller condition, that needs to be waived as well as the buyer conditions. Attachments. As you can see here, there can be other things. Maybe there is a financing schedule they need to put in the contract so you know exactly what they're looking for, especially when it comes to something like a mortgage assumption. That doesn't happen lots, but it is going to happen more and more as time goes by. Tenancy schedule. If you're a landlord and you're buying the property, you want to know more about the tenant that's there. So we'll use another form to get that information from the seller. If you're the seller, be prepared to give up whatever information you legally can about your tenant and what's going on, because it's going to be asked. Manufactured home schedule. That happens if you have a manufactured home. So they have other information that needs to be gathered to make sure the buyer knows what they are purchasing. And of course, the sale of the buyer schedule or property schedule. So if you have a home for sale, then that's going to be added as well. There could be other addendums. There could be other things that are required. All these terms are all negotiable because, again, it's between the buyer and seller. Closing documents. So this is where we give instruction to lawyers. There's a bunch of instruction here. There's more instructions here. And as you can see, there's more instructions here. So if there's a failure to close and all these things. So pretty much everything has been thought about for the majority of 99% of homes. Insurance. If you're the seller, make sure you keep your insurance on the property till you know for sure your home is sold. If you're the buyer, you can start by by talking to an insurer about your home. In some older homes, you may want to start this process. In fact, this may even be a clause that you put in up here under buyer condition, subject to the buyer obtaining insurance. On older homes, insurers have the right to decline. So you may be with Wawanesa and they say no, but the co-op may say yes. Or Intact may say yes or no. It could be because in the home inspection you found out there was a 60 amp service, and that could be an issue. It could be there is other issues with the home. So you want to talk to your insurance company if you're the buyer and make sure that your insurance company does not have a problem with you purchasing that home. You can just simply tell them what the property address is and they will look into that for you. Remedies. All right. This is also where lawyers are given instruction. Once this contract is put together, remember this. You have agreed to something, the other parties agreed to something. Us real estate agents are out of the deal at that point. We have handed a contract to you, now we give it to the lawyers, and the lawyers' hands are tied to whatever we've done here. So sometimes we need to get their feedback. Sometimes you want to have your lawyer on speed dial and ask, what do you think about this or that? Oh, well, we might want to look at this or that. So I'm going to read this one here, 12.1. If you're the buyer or the seller, this is important. If the seller or the buyer fail or refuse to complete the contract, the other party may seek remedies, such as claims for deposits, damages, and reasonable costs, including legal fees and disbursements of the solicitor, full indemnity basis. Okay, so an example. Last day, buyer says, nope, not taking the home. I lost my job. There could be all kinds of reasons. Lost my job, can't qualify, couldn't sell my home, I didn't tell you, I lied, I whatever. But they don't take the home. What remedy is there for the seller? Well, first of all, there is deposit. But if you moved out of home and you're renting something else, or you brought something else and now you have, bridge financing holding the whole thing together for you, there could be other things. This is a legal issue that needs to be solved with your lawyer. And that lawyer will talk to the other lawyer, and they're going to discuss how that's going to happen, how much deposit, and all of that goes into it. Also, sometimes the brokers involved also get involved. So the selling broker and the buying broker for the real estate contracts may get involved as well, but normally it's done between the lawyers. So there could be even more money involved. I tell my buyers, be very sure that you're taking the property because you could lose more than just your deposit. And to the sellers, don't think that you're going to always get the deposit, because lawyers can agree to say, no, we don't think any damages really happen. And the other lawyer says, we're going to have to sue, and you say no. So no promises that you'll get anything if they walk. But know this, in the contract, it does say bad things can happen. And they normally will, because we're talking a lot of money normally. All right, as you can see, this is where we sign off and everything. Here's where the brokerages are put in, but here's also where to make sure that you've confirmed that you understand everything here. The initials are gone over, and again we initial again. Sometimes in a hot market, or sometimes buyers just need to know, they will put in here the offer is open until a certain date and a certain time. And the reason that is because maybe they have a limited amount of time to make their decision on which home they're choosing, and maybe they have 2 or 3 homes on the go. So that's where that comes into effect, is right here. Once everything is agreed upon and everybody agrees to all of the terms and conditions in the contract, including price, possession, chattels, all that stuff, then acceptance happens. Once it's fully accepted, then we're good to go. We have a contract. If there are conditions in the contract, any condition at all, it is not a sold contract, it is a conditional contract. So the difference simply means that there's conditions that need to be waived. If they're not waived, it doesn't mean you have a done deal. It also means that if you're the buyer, know that the selling realtor is probably still trying to sell the house, because they don't know for sure if you're going to take it. They just know that according to the contract, there's goodwill that you are going to move forward and purchase that home. Last, I would say, whether you're the buyer or the seller, just remember, and I'm going to say this again, this contract is between the two of you, and everything else is negotiated using an agent. If the agent steps out of their boundary and they feel that, hey, you deserve this, or you should have that, or I think this, it's none of their business. Your business, not theirs. All right, well, that is the residential purchase contract, and let's go on to the next one.